The chair legs screamed across the hardwood before I understood that my mother had both hands wrapped around the backrest. Maisie was already bending her knees to sit. The chair vanished behind her, and my 9-year-old daughter dropped hard onto the floor. One palm slapped the wood. Her other hand caught the Christmas tablecloth, making silverware jump and gravy strike the side of its bowl. For 1 second, the room went still. Then my cousin laughed. 2 other relatives joined him with the thin laughter people use when they know something is cruel but do not want to object. My mother planted the chair beside Melissa's children and snapped. "It's for my real grandkids. Get out." Maisie looked up at me. Her face had gone white, but she was not crying. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I thought that one was for me." I knelt beside her and checked her wrist, her knee, and the back of her head before helping her stand. On the table sat the place card she had made that afternoon. She had written Grandma in careful gold letters and drawn 3 holly leaves beneath it. My father would not meet my eyes. I folded the card and slipped it into my coat pocket. Then I sent the one-word message my attorney and I had agreed on earlier that day. The message said, "Proceed." "You have 24 hours, I told my mother. Her smile disappeared. "For what?" My phone rang. Priya had spent the past week reviewing a property authorization bearing my signature, though I had never signed it. I put the call on speaker because one arm was still around my daughter. "Samantha," Priya said, "I have the voluntary surrender agreement ready. If they reject it, I can serve the 30-day termination notice tomorrow. Do you want me to start the eviction process?" My mother stared at me, as if I had become a stranger. My father went pale. Then he asked the question that told me the chair was only the visible part of what they had done. "Has the district seen the real lease? Before I take you back 13 days, tell me how you are doing today. Stay with me, because the chair was only the beginning of what my parents had hidden inside my house. If stories about protecting the people who cannot protect themselves matter to you, subscribe to the channel and keep watching." 13 days earlier, Maisie and I were sitting at our kitchen table with gold markers, red cardstock, and enough glitter to follow us into the new year. Mrs. Delgado, Maisie's teacher, had sent home the leftover cardstock from a classroom art project, and Maisie had decided every guest should have a handmade placegar card. Our townhouse was modest, but it was ours. I had bought it 6 years earlier, before I chose to become a mother through donor assistance. By December 2025, I was 41, Maisie was 9, and our home was the place where she could spread paper across every flat surface without anyone telling her she took up too much room. She was lettering names onto Christmas place cards for my mother's dinner at Cedar Lane Cottage. Her tongue pressed against the corner of her mouth whenever she concentrated. "Grandma likes the holly leaves, right?" she asked. "She'll love them." Maisie finished the 3rd leaf, then reached for a blank card. Her hand stopped over it. "Should I make mine now?" she asked, "or wait until Grandma decides where I'm sitting?" The marker in my hand hovered above the card I was decorating for my father. Some questions asked for information. Others came from children who already feared the answer and hoped you would prove them wrong. "There will be room for you," I said. Maisie smiled, but it was the small, careful smile she used when trying to help an adult feel better. She wrote her own name in plain black ink, without holly leaves. Cedar Lane had belonged to my Aunt Elaine. After she died in October 2021, probate ended the following May, and the deed transferred to me. The cottage was a 3-bedroom Cape Cod 20 minutes from our townhouse, inherited without a mortgage but not without taxes, insurance, repairs, or responsibility. Ruth Bell, Aunt Elaine's longtime neighbor, still mailed Maisie a birthday card every year. She was one of the few adults connected to Cedar Lane who never made Maisie ask where she belonged. My parents moved in on the 1st of July 2022. Priya Nair, an attorney I had known since college, drafted the rental agreement. After the first year, it converted to month. My parents paid $850 a month, far below market rent, enough to cover most carrying costs without making them feel dependent on me. At least, that was what I had told myself. I never called Cedar Lane my house in front of them. I did not inspect rooms, dictate guests, or remind them whose name was on the deed. My mother hosted civic luncheons there, posed for campaign photographs beside Aunt Elaine's fireplace, and spoke publicly about stable homes. That winter, Judith Carver announced she was running for the Brookfield County School Board. Her first flyer showed her standing with Ethan and Piper, Melissa's children. Stable homes, strong families, protected children. Maisie was not in the photograph. I explained that away. Ethan attended middle school. Piper was in elementary school. Judith's campaign concerned public education, so perhaps she wanted children who attended Brookfield schools beside her. I had not asked how they attended those schools. Melissa lived with her husband Nathan in Ashford County, outside the Brookfield district. When she mentioned how well the children were doing, I assumed they had received a legal transfer. No one had asked me for help, so I believed none had been required. On Friday, December 12, a certified envelope arrived while Maisie was at school. The return address belonged to Brookfield County Public Schools. A secure email from Leona Briggs, the district residency coordinator, reached my inbox less than an hour later. The district was not sending me a student file. Leona asked me to verify 3 things. Did I own Cedar Lane Cottage? Had I authorized Melissa and her children to live there? Was the signature on the attached owner authorization mine? I opened the PDF. The first page claimed Melissa rented 2 bedrooms from Judith and Gordon. The property description was accurate. The monthly rent was wrong. The deposit was invented. At the bottom sat a version of my signature that looked as though someone had practiced it until the hesitation disappeared. I had never seen the document. I called my father. He answered on the 4th ring. Everything all right? I received a residency verification from Brookfield Schools. Silence settled between us. What exactly did they send? He asked. I had not mentioned an attachment, a document with my name on it. He exhaled. Samantha, this is a harmless address arrangement. The children are settled. Correcting it before Christmas could disrupt their year. My hand tightened around the phone. Did you know the district would contact me? You own the property. They verify things sometimes. Did I authorize Melissa to live there? You're making this sound criminal. I asked you a yes or no question. His voice softened into the patient tone he used whenever he wanted me to feel unreasonable. Talk to your mother before you start tearing the family apart. The call ended without an answer. I forwarded the verification request and attachment to Priya, then drove to her office after work. She retrieved the genuine Cedar Lane agreement and placed the documents side by side. For several minutes, she said nothing. Then she traced one paragraph with the capped end of her pen. The real agreement prohibited my parents from subletting, adding occupants without written consent, or using the property to establish another person's residency or eligibility. The false document repeated one distinctive sentence, almost word for word, except someone had reversed its meaning and turned a prohibition into permission. That wording came from my agreement, I said. Yes, it did, Priya replied. Who had access to it? You, me, and your parents. I thought of my father's silence. My mother's flyer. Maisie asking whether she should wait to learn where she belonged. Priya slid the papers toward me. Do not sign the district verification yet. Preserve the certified letter, the secure email, and this PDF exactly as you received them. I'm not trying to start a war. I understand that. I just need to understand what happened. Priya held my gaze. Then start with the person who gained something. I looked at the false sublease, at my practice signature, and at an address my family had treated as theirs, until someone needed my ownership to become real. Priya tapped the names of Melissa's children. Who benefits, she asked, if the district believes your sister's children live in your house? Priya's question followed me into work on Monday morning. Who benefited if Brookfield County believed Melissa's children lived in my house? I tried to leave it in the parking lot. My first patient was an 8-year-old boy named Caleb, who had fractured his wrist falling from a scooter. The bone had healed, but confidence had not. He held his hand close to his chest and watched his mother's face before every movement, as if pain could be predicted by the way an adult reacted. "Try turning your palm toward the ceiling," I told him. Caleb began, then stopped when his mother inhaled sharply. I asked her to sit where he could not see her for a moment. When he tried again, he moved farther. Children learned safety from our faces long before they trusted our explanations. I had spent years teaching parents that lesson while ignoring how carefully Maisie studied every expression at Cedar Lane. She knew when my mother's smile tightened. She knew when Gordon changed the subject. She knew that Ethan and Piper could take up space without asking, while she waited for permission to make her own place card. By the time I finished work, I no longer wanted a theory about the false lease. I wanted to see what my property was being used to prove. My parents had reported a slow leak beneath the kitchen sink the previous week, and one of the upstairs smoke alarms had begun chirping despite a battery change. I texted Gordon that I would meet the plumber at Cedar Lane on Tuesday afternoon and replace the alarm unit while I was there. He replied with a thumbs up. The visit was lawful, ordinary, and scheduled. I repeated that to myself as I unlocked the front door. Cedar Lane smelled like cinnamon wax and fresh pine. Judith had wrapped garland around the staircase and placed campaign signs beside the entry table. Gordon was in the kitchen with the plumber, explaining the leak in more detail than the man required. I carried the new smoke alarm toward the stairs, then stopped at the breakfast nook. 2 Brookfield backpacks hung from matching hooks beneath a framed weekly schedule. Spare uniform shirts had been folded into wicker baskets. Ethan's mathematics paper and Piper's spelling test were displayed in inexpensive frames beside Judith's campaign brochures. At first glance, it looked like the corner of a house where children began every school day. At second glance, it looked like a set. The shoes beneath the bench were too clean. The uniform shirts still held the flat creases from their packaging. There were no half-used pencils, forgotten water bottles, food wrappers, or damp coats. I opened no drawers and entered no bedrooms. I did not need to. 5 people did not live in that house. Someone had arranged enough evidence to make a photograph say they did. Gordon followed my gaze. "The bags stay here because I drive them in the mornings." "From Ashford?" I asked. "They spend plenty of time with us," he replied. That wasn't my question. Before he answered, the front door opened. Judith walked in wearing a red campaign badge pinned to her coat. She looked from me to the backpacks and immediately understood what I was examining. "You came here to inspect us," she said. "I came for the smoke alarm and the leak. But now you're viewing your own parents through a landlord's eyes." "I am the landlord, Mom. More importantly, the district sent me a document saying Melissa and the children live here." Judith removed her gloves one finger at a time. "Safe schools should not depend on zip codes." "Do they live here?" "Children deserve stability." "Do they sleep here most school nights?" Her chin lifted. "You always reduce family to forms when feelings become inconvenient." The answer was still no. A glossy brochure rested on the breakfast table. Judith's photograph filled the front panel. Beneath it, a paragraph praised her decades of service and described her as providing a stable weekday home for 2 Brookfield grandchildren. The wording was not accidental. Neither were the backpacks behind her in the photograph. Cousin Leah arrived while I was replacing the smoke alarm. Judith had asked her to photograph the Christmas decorations for the campaign page. Leah moved through the rooms with her phone, adjusting candles and straightening pillows, while Judith directed her toward the most flattering angles. In the dining room, the main table had been extended for Christmas. Near the hallway stood a small folding table with 3 narrow chairs. "Don't include too much of that one," Judith told Leah. "It's only for overflow." Leah shifted her angle, but not before taking one photograph that captured both tables. On the sideboard, framed school portraits of Ethan and Piper stood beside campaign materials, I looked for the drawing Maisie had given Judith after Thanksgiving, a picture of Cedar Lane with all of us beneath a crooked yellow sun. It was not there. I checked the mantel without touching anything, Judith noticed. I rotate the children's things. Where is Maisie's drawing? I put away anything that doesn't fit the Christmas colors. It had been made with red, green, and gold crayons. Judith turned to Leah before I could answer. Make sure you get the grandchildren's photographs in the background. She did not correct herself. She did not need to. When Leah left, Judith handed me 2 wrapped gifts and said Christmas dinner would begin at 5:30. Bring Maisie early if she wants to help with the place cards, she added. But prepare her to respect the seating plan. I will not have confusion in front of guests. What confusion? I asked. You know she gets sensitive when she thinks something should be equal, Judith replied. She is 9. So are plenty of children who understand that every family has an order. Gordon stared into the sink while the plumber tested the repaired pipe. I wanted to confront both of them about the lease. I wanted to place the forged signature on Judith's polished table and force a direct answer. But Leah had just left. The plumber was still kneeling beneath the sink, and Judith was already turning every question into an accusation against me. A public argument would give her another stage. I'm coming early on Christmas, I said. We will speak privately before anyone sits down. Judith smiled as if she had won something. Of course. Maisie was quiet when I picked her up from after-school care. Jamal's grandmother, Denise Carter, was collecting him at the same time. She handed Maisie a cinnamon roll from a paper bag and shifted her tote off the bench before Maisie could ask whether there was room. On the drive home, Maisie watched the houses pass until we crossed out of Brookfield County. Did Grandma put up my drawing? She asked. Not today, I said. She rubbed one thumb along the edge of her seatbelt. Is she embarrassed because I don't have a dad? The question landed harder than anything Judith had said. No. Your family began differently, but there is nothing embarrassing about you. Grandma thinks families need a mom and a dad. She is old-fashioned. Maisie looked out the window again. She has had 9 years. I had used the same explanation for so long that I had stopped hearing what it required from my daughter. Be patient. Do not take it personally. Give Grandma time. In every version, the adult was protected, and the child was asked to wait. That evening, I replied to Leona through the district's secure portal. I confirmed that I owned Cedar Lane. I stated that I had not authorized Melissa, Ethan, or Piper as residents, and that the signature on the owner authorization was not mine. I did not ask for student records. I told Leona I was consulting counsel and would provide any further property verification before the stated deadline. Then I saved the confirmation and closed my laptop. My phone rang before I could stand. Melissa's name appeared on the screen. I answered without greeting her. What did you tell the district? She asked. I confirmed facts about my property. Her breathing changed. Why is a simple school address already with a lawyer? I looked toward the hallway, where Maisie was brushing her teeth. Melissa had not asked what document I meant. She had not asked why the district contacted me. She already knew the address was not where her children lived. What did you tell the district? Melissa repeated. I told them I own Cedar Lane. You do not live there, and the signature they sent me is not mine. She went quiet long enough for me to hear a cabinet close somewhere behind her. Can we talk without Mom and Dad? That was the first honest thing she had said. We met the next morning at a coffee shop halfway between Ashford and my townhouse. I left Maisie with a friend from work, and Melissa came alone. She chose a table in the back, kept her coat on, and placed her phone face down beside a cup she never touched. You're treating this like fraud, she said. What would you call using my address and my signature without permission? An address favor. Mom said the children spend enough time with them that the district allows it. Do Ethan and Piper sleep at Cedar Lane Sunday through Thursday? Her eyes dropped to the lid of her cup. Not every week. Most school nights? I asked. No, she said. The word came out quietly, but it changed the conversation. There was no misunderstanding left for me to preserve. Melissa rubbed her palms together beneath the table. They stay over sometimes. Dad drives them. Their things are there. Backpacks and spare shirts do not make a residence. I signed what Dad gave me. He handled the wording. What did you sign? A lease, some school forms, and something that let Mom deal with school or medical issues if I couldn't get there. Give me copies. Her head lifted sharply. I can't. You can, Melissa. You do not want to. If Nathan sees those papers, he'll lose his mind. If the district sees everything, the kids could be pulled out of school in the middle of the year. Did Nathan know you claimed the children lived at Cedar Lane? She pressed her lips together. That answered me before she spoke. He thought Mom's address was being used for a transfer, she said. He didn't read the forms. The old reflex rose in me, the one that looked for the softest interpretation before anyone had earned it. I pushed it down. You let your husband believe one thing while you signed another. Our marriage has been bad for months. We have credit card debt, the house needs a new roof, and every conversation turns into money. Mom said if things got worse, the children needed stability already in place. Are you separated? I asked. No, she said. Has anyone filed for custody? I continued. No. Then why were your children coached to pretend they lived somewhere they did not? Melissa's face tightened. You don't understand how Dad works. He made a calendar. He told us which nights counted. He said if anyone asked, the kids should say they slept at Cedar Lane Sunday through Thursday and went home to Ashford on weekends. A chill moved through me that had nothing to do with the cold window beside us. He rehearsed the children? He called it keeping their answers consistent. They are 12 and 10. He taught them to lie to school officials. Keep your voice down. I had not raised it. Melissa was hearing the weight of the words for the first time, because no one had wrapped them in procedural language. Do not question Ethan or Piper about this again, I said. Do not practice answers with them. Do not ask Maisie what she knows. You need your own lawyer, and you need to tell Nathan the truth before someone else does. Her expression hardened. You always get to be the clean one. I did not sign those forms. No, you just own the house everyone else needs. The accusation hurt because it was designed to. For years, my family had treated my ability to solve a problem as proof that I was responsible for solving it. Now Melissa wanted my ownership to become consent. I gave Mom and Dad an affordable home, I said. That did not give them the right to manufacture a second household inside it. She looked toward the front door. If you correct the address, Mom will say you did it because you hate that my children have a father. I am correcting it because it is false. And what happens to Christmas? The question almost made me laugh, though nothing about the morning was funny. My signature had been copied, her children had been coached, and she was still measuring the crisis by whether dinner remained comfortable. That depends on what our parents do next. Melissa left without giving me copies. She carried the untouched coffee to the trash, then changed her mind and took it with her, as if wasting $3 would be the most irresponsible thing she did that day. I drove directly to Priya's office. She listened without interrupting while I described the false routine, the papers Melissa admitted signing, and Gordon's instructions to the children. When I finished, Priya closed her notebook. You need to separate the school issue from the tenancy, she said. Correcting a property record does not automatically end your parents' right to occupy Cedar Lane. Ending their tenancy requires its own lawful process. I am not changing the locks. I know. I am telling you what the choices actually are. The first option was a written voluntary surrender agreement. Judith and Gordon could agree to a reasonable January move-out date, return the property in acceptable condition, and disclose every document that used Cedar Lane or my name. The second option was termination of their month-to-month tenancy by written notice. If they remained after January 31, Priya could then file for possession. Nothing happened instantly, and nothing happened through a threat shouted across a dinner table. I'm not sure I want them out, I said. Priya's expression did not change. Then I will prepare the documents and hold them. Preparation is not a decision. I stared at the legal pad between us. I want to speak to them privately before Christmas dinner. I want to hear whether they will correct this without turning it into a war. You are combining a family gathering with a confrontation involving housing and false documents. I'm going early. Maisie and I will leave if Mom refuses to treat her decently. Priya folded her hands. You need a clear trigger, not anger, not embarrassment, a decision you can explain to yourself tomorrow. We agreed that if Judith or Gordon refused a private conversation, defended the false records, or publicly humiliated Maisie, I would text the single word proceed. Priya would call before 7:30. She would not pretend a court filing could happen on Christmas night. She would simply state the two lawful paths and ask whether I wanted her to send the voluntary surrender agreement or begin the termination process. Before I left, she looked at me over the top of her glasses. Do not use the call to frighten them into loving your daughter. I won't, I said. Housing can create distance. It cannot create remorse, Priya replied. That evening, Melissa sent me a screenshot without explanation. It showed a calendar Gordon had created for the claimed weekday routine. Blue blocks marked false overnight stays at Cedar Lane. Notes beside several dates reminded Melissa when to leave backpacks, school folders, and medication at my parents' house. At the bottom, one February reminder read, Renew POA. I typed, What does POA mean? The message showed as read. Melissa did not answer that night or the next morning. On Christmas afternoon, Maisie stood in our entryway, wearing a navy dress and holding the box of place cards against her chest. Rain had darkened the pavement outside, and the bare branches scraped softly against the townhouse window. Am I supposed to go? She asked. I crouched to straighten the ribbon at her waist. Yes, because you were invited. But listen to me. If anyone treats you like you are less than family, we leave immediately. You will not have to earn your place by staying quiet. She studied my face, searching for the part of the promise that might bend. Even if Grandma gets upset? She asked. Especially then, I said. We reached Cedar Lane 40 minutes before dinner. Cars filled the curb, though I had asked Judith for time alone. Through the front window, I saw relatives moving between the dining room and kitchen. I should have turned around then. I had expected the house to be quiet, and I told myself we could hand over the cards, ask once for 5 private minutes, and leave at the first refusal. It was the last time I let hope overrule what Maisie had already shown me. Judith opened the door before I knocked. Her eyes moved from me to Maisie's place card box. I asked to speak privately, I said. She stepped aside, but did not lower her voice. Not tonight. Tonight the family sees where everyone belongs. Judith's words followed us into the house. Tonight the family sees where everyone belongs. I had promised we would leave at the first refusal, and she had just given it. But Judith had already turned toward the living room. Maisie was clutching the cards she had spent hours making, and I made the mistake of believing we could deliver them and leave before anything worse happened. Cousin Leah was arranging relatives for a family photograph. Children in front, Leah said. Grandchildren near Grandma and Grandpa. Ethan and Piper stepped beside Judith without being directed. When Maisie moved toward them, Judith rested a hand on her shoulder and guided her toward the folding table near the hallway. Stand there so we can balance the frame, she said. Maisie obeyed. From where I stood, she appeared close enough to be included, but not close enough to touch anyone. Judith placed one hand on Ethan's shoulder and the other on Piper's. Gordon stood beside her, looking at the camera instead of at me. Leah took several photographs. In the last one, Maisie smiled, because everyone else had been told to smile. Afterward, she carried her place cards into the dining room. The main table had been laid with Judith's china and polished silver. Ethan's name stood beside Gordon. Piper's stood beside Judith. The remaining cards marked places for the adults. Maisie searched the table twice. I made one for myself, she said quietly. A card with her name sat near an empty chair at the far end. It had been moved from the top of the box, though neither Maisie nor I had placed it there. "That one must be mine," she said. Judith was carrying a serving dish from the kitchen. She saw Maisie touch the chair and did not correct her. Instead, she set down the dish, adjusted a candle, and waited until Mark and several other relatives entered the room. "Dinner is ready," she announced. "Everyone find your assigned place." Maisie pulled the chair back and began to sit. Judith crossed the space in 2 fast steps. Both hands closed around the backrest, and she yanked it away. Maisie struck the floor before I reached her. One palm scraped across the hardwood. Her right knee hit hard enough to make her cry out, and her fingers caught the tablecloth, sending forks and glasses rattling against the china. Mark laughed openly. 2 relatives beside him gave short, nervous laughs, then looked away. Ethan let out a startled sound that almost became a laugh before his face changed. He stared at Maisie with immediate shame. Piper lowered her eyes to her plate. Judith dragged the chair beside Ethan and Piper. "It's for my real grandkids. Get out!" The words silenced the room more completely than Maisie's fall had. My daughter looked up at me, stunned. "I'm sorry, Mom. I thought the chair was for me." I dropped beside her and forced myself to move in the order I used with injured children at work. She knew her name and where she was. She had not struck her head or neck. Her pupils looked even, and she denied dizziness, nausea, blurred vision, or head pain. I asked her to move both wrists and open and close her hands. Her left palm was scraped but not deeply cut. Her right knee was already reddening beneath her tights. "Can you bend it?" I asked. She nodded and tried. "Can you put weight on it?" I helped her rise slowly. She winced but remained standing. I kept one arm around her waist while she leaned against me. Judith watched as if my concern were part of an unnecessary scene. She startled herself. "Children fall." You pulled the chair away. She took a seat that was not assigned to her. She found her own name beside it. Judith glanced at the place card on the table. Then she should have asked. Maisie's body went rigid beneath my arm. That was the moment the last excuse I had made for my mother stopped working. This was not confusion, old-fashioned language, or a woman who needed more time. Judith had arranged an audience, allowed Maisie to believe the chair was hers, and waited until she could humiliate her in front of everyone. I took out my phone and sent Priya the one-word message we had agreed upon. It said, "Proceed." "You have 24 hours, I told Judith. Her mouth curved into a disbelieving smile. "To do what, Samantha? Apologize because your daughter ignored the seating plan?" "No. You have 24 hours to respond to a voluntary surrender agreement, disclose every document using Cedar Lane or my name, and stop using my property address for anyone who does not live here." The smile left her face. "You would threaten your parents' home over a chair? This is not only about the chair. It never is with you. You collect grievances until you can punish someone." My phone rang. Priya's name appeared on the screen exactly as we had arranged. Because Maisie still needed my support to remain standing, I answered with one hand and put the call on speaker. "Samantha," Priya said, "I have the voluntary surrender agreement ready. If they reject it, I can serve the 30-day termination notice tomorrow. Do you want me to start the eviction process?" No one moved. Judith looked around the table, perhaps expecting someone to defend her. Mark stared at his place setting. The relatives who had laughed were suddenly fascinated by the candles. Gordon's face lost its color. "Has the district seen the genuine tenancy agreement?" he asked. Priya went silent on the phone. I looked at my father. He had not asked whether the children would lose their school placements. He had not asked whether I had reported the forged signature. He wanted to know whether the district could compare the false paperwork with the real lease he had once signed. Judith turned on him. "Why would that matter?" He did not answer her. Priya spoke carefully. "Samantha, we do not need to discuss documents in front of minors or extended family. I will send the agreement through the proper channel." "Do that," I said. The deadline is tomorrow at 7. Judith stepped toward me. You are not taking my Christmas and turning it into some legal performance. You created the performance. You brought a lawyer into my dining room. You brought my signature into a school file. Several heads lifted. Gordon closed his eyes briefly, but Judith's expression did not soften. She looked angry that I had said it aloud, not shocked that it had happened. Maisie's fingers tightened around my sleeve. I turned toward the room. The children will not hear another legal word tonight. Ethan looked at me then, his face still red with embarrassment. Piper remained motionless beside the chair Judith had moved for them. Neither child had caused this, and I refused to make them sit through the collapse of the adults around them. I collected Maisie's coat and the place card box. Judith followed us into the entryway. If you leave now, she said, do not expect me to chase after you. I stopped waiting for that years ago. No one blocked the door. There were no police, no dramatic removal, and no keys taken from anyone. My parents remained inside Cedar Lane because the law did not erase a tenancy in the time it took a child to fall. The difference was that I was no longer going to protect that tenancy from the consequences of what they had done. Rain tapped against the windshield as I drove home. Maisie sat in the back with her injured knee elevated on a folded coat. Every few minutes, I checked her in the mirror. She watched the dark houses passing outside and did not ask whether Christmas dinner would continue without us. My phone vibrated at a red light. The message came from Gordon. Do not let Priya serve notice until I explain what Judith was trying to secure before Melissa's marriage collapses. By the time we reached home, Maisie's knee had swollen beneath her tights, and the scrape across her palm had begun to sting. I settled her on the kitchen counter, helped her change into pajamas, and cleaned the scrape with warm water while she stared at the gold place cards still inside their box. She could bend her knee and bear weight, although each movement made her wince. Because she had fallen hard, I called the pediatric advice line and described exactly what had happened. The nurse told me to watch for worsening pain, vomiting, unusual sleepiness, confusion, or difficulty walking. If none appeared, I could use ice, elevation, rest, and an age-appropriate pain reliever. Maisie listened to every word. Am I going to the hospital? She asked. Not unless something changes. Right now you are sore and shaken, but you are safe. I wrapped ice in a dish towel and placed it over her knee. She held still for several minutes, then asked the question I had been dreading since we left Cedar Lane. Are Grandma and Grandpa going to be homeless because I sat in the wrong chair? I set the first aid supplies aside and moved close enough that our knees touched. No. Adults create rental agreements. Adults sign forms, tell the truth or lie, and decide how they treat people. A child needing a chair cannot evict anyone. But you gave them 24 hours after I fell. I gave them 24 hours because they used my house and my name without permission. What Grandma did to you made me stop postponing a decision I already needed to make. Maisie picked at the edge of the towel. If I had asked before sitting, would they still get to stay? Her question showed me how quickly children turn adult wrongdoing into a test they believe they failed. You did nothing wrong. Your name was beside the chair. Grandma wanted you to think it was yours, and then she took it away while people watched. That choice belongs to her. Maisie's eyes filled, but she blinked until the tears stayed where they were. Why does she say Ethan and Piper are real grandchildren? I came from your body. I had spent 9 years translating Judith's prejudice into phrases that sounded less ugly. She was traditional. She needed time. She worried about appearances. None of those explanations had protected Maisie. They had only taught her that cruelty became acceptable when an adult delivered it politely. Grandma believes a family only counts if it looks the way she expects, I said. She thinks a child should have a married mother and father whose names everyone knows. She is wrong. Does she think I'm fake? She treats you as if the way our family began makes you less important. I should have named that sooner, instead of asking you to keep being patient. Maisie looked down at her scraped palm. You said she was learning. I wanted to believe she was. I am sorry I made you wait for proof she did not intend to give. She leaned against me, careful of her knee. I held her until her breathing slowed, then helped her settle on the sofa with a blanket and one of her favorite movies. She fell asleep before the ending, and I remained beside her until midnight, waking her once to make sure she responded normally. At 9 the next morning, Priya emailed the voluntary surrender agreement to Judith and Gordon. It did not demand that they leave immediately. It offered a January 24 move-out date, required them to stop using Cedar Lane to establish anyone else's residency, and required disclosure of every document containing my name, signature, or property address. They would return the keys only when they surrendered possession. If they rejected the agreement, Priya would proceed with formal termination of the month-to-month tenancy. Judith did not reply to Priya. Instead, she wrote in the family group chat, "Samantha is using a child's misunderstanding to throw two retired parents onto the street. We opened our home for Christmas, and she arrived with an eviction plan already prepared." Several relatives reacted with shocked faces. Cousin Mark wrote that legal threats had no place at a family table. Leah did not defend me, but she did not agree with Judith either. I typed 3 different responses and deleted all of them. Every version tried to explain the chair, the false signature, and Gordon's question about the genuine lease. Judith wanted me arguing in public because public confusion was safer for her than private documentation. I closed the chat. Priya sent the agreement again, through the formal delivery address listed in the tenancy documents, and copied Gordon. She instructed me not to negotiate its terms through relatives, social media, or text. At 11, Gordon requested a video meeting with Priya and me. Judith was invited, but Gordon said she refused to attend because she would not participate in her own humiliation. Maisie was resting upstairs when I joined the call from my kitchen. Gordon appeared alone in the study at Cedar Lane. The campaign posters had been removed from the wall behind him. "I created the owner authorization," he said before Priya finished confirming who was present. "I also prepared the sublease." Hearing the admission did not bring relief. It made the forged signature on my screen feel more personal. "Did you sign my name?" I asked. "I replicated it so the packet would not be delayed." "You forged it." I completed an administrative requirement. Priya's voice remained even. "Mr. Carver, we are not conducting a criminal interview. Samantha asked whether you placed her signature on a document without authorization." Gordon looked at me. "Yes." The word sat between us without apology. He claimed the only purpose had been to keep Ethan and Piper in Brookfield schools. He described the forms as a practical response to district boundaries that harmed children. "If school access was the only purpose," Priya asked, "why does the file describe a kinship, care arrangement?" Gordon adjusted his glasses. "That language is standard for children whose parents are temporarily unable to provide weekday care," Priya replied. "Melissa and Nathan live together 28 minutes away. Their marriage has been unstable. Has either parent delegated care because they are unable to provide it? They signed what was necessary." I leaned toward the screen. "What authority did Judith receive?" Gordon's expression closed. "You are making ordinary grandparent involvement sound sinister." "Then show us the forms." He refused. Priya explained that I would deny my signature to the district, terminate the tenancy through lawful notice, and cooperate with any review that followed. She did not threaten arrest, prosecution, or public exposure. Gordon kept returning to the children's school placement, as if repeating the benefit could erase the method. "You will punish Ethan and Piper because Judith lost her temper," he said. "No," I replied. "The district will decide where they legally attend school. I am deciding whether people who copied my signature and humiliated my daughter will continue living in my property." After the call, Priya reminded me that Gordon's admission did not answer why the caregiver language existed. It only established who built the property package. Early that afternoon, an email arrived from an attorney representing Melissa. Melissa had retained family counsel that morning. With her written authorization, The attorney provided the documents relevant to the false residency arrangement. The first was a notarized kinship care affidavit. It stated that Melissa and Nathan were temporarily unable to provide consistent weekday care, and that Ethan and Piper resided with Judith and Gordon for reasons not solely related to school attendance. The second was a limited parental delegation power of attorney, lasting 180 days. It gave Judith documented authority over school and routine medical matters, while preserving Melissa and Nathan's parental rights. I did not yet understand how Judith intended to use it. I read both documents twice. Melissa had signed them and checked a box certifying that she was authorized to submit the arrangement for both parents. Nathan had neither signed nor reviewed the affidavit, although I did not yet know what he had been told about the address itself. At 6:45, Priya confirmed that neither Judith nor Gordon had signed the surrender agreement. At 7, the deadline expired. The next morning, December 27, a license process server delivered the written termination notice at Cedar Lane. The month-to-month tenancy would end January 31, and Priya marked February 1 as the first date a possession filing could become necessary if they refused to leave. That afternoon, Melissa's lawyer forwarded one final item from Melissa's original email account. It was a short thread Gordon had copied her on, because her signature would be needed again. His message ended with one sentence: "Sign the February renewal. Judith wants a full 6-month weekday record before Nathan makes any move." The email about a 6-month record changed the question I had been asking. Until then, I had believed my parents had built a false household to keep Ethan and Piper in Brookfield schools. That was serious enough. But Gordon's reference to Nathan making a move suggested the school address was not the destination. It was the foundation. Melissa's attorney, Claire Monroe, arranged a meeting for the afternoon of December 27. Nathan joined by video from his office and had signed written consent, allowing Claire to share the documents needed to correct the residency file. Melissa sat across from me with a folder pressed flat beneath both hands, as though keeping it closed could still limit what was inside. Claire began by stating that the meeting was not a custody negotiation and that no one was agreeing to use the family documents outside the district correction and related legal advice. Priya attended with me to address the property records and the false use of my signature. The boundaries mattered. For once, no one in my family could blur a school form, a rental agreement, and a family favor into the same harmless thing. Melissa admitted she had signed the kinship care affidavit and the limited power of attorney in August. Judith had described them as temporary forms that allowed the children to attend Brookfield schools and let her handle an emergency if Melissa could not arrive quickly. "You signed a notarized statement saying your children lived with Mom most school nights," I said. "That is not a box you checked without understanding." "I knew the address part was not accurate," she replied. "I did not understand what Mom was building around it." Nathan leaned closer to his camera. "I knew they were using Cedar Lane for school. Melissa told me her parents had arranged a permitted transfer through Gordon's old contacts. I knew the address was not our home, and I chose not to ask what paperwork made it possible. That was wrong. I did not know anyone had claimed we were unable to care for our children." Melissa looked at the screen, but not directly at him. "You still accepted the benefit." "Yes," he said. "But I did not know your mother was presenting herself as their weekday parent." Claire stopped them before the argument widened. She asked Melissa to explain what Judith had said about the marriage. Melissa's shoulders sank. "Mom has called us unstable for more than a year. Every time Nathan and I fought about money, she said he could leave and try to take the kids. She said I needed a record showing the children had somewhere established to go." Nathan's face tightened. "We have debt. We have argued. I have never threatened to take Ethan and Piper from her." Melissa nodded once. "I know that now." Claire opened Gordon's rehearsal calendar. The blue blocks I had seen in Melissa's screenshot covered more than claimed overnight stays. Several dates carried notes such as breakfast photo, homework at kitchen table, and leave Piper's inhaler in downstairs cabinet. On one Saturday, Gordon had written different clothes before second photo. Melissa unlocked her phone and handed it to Claire, who displayed a series of messages on the conference room screen. Judith had instructed her to bring the children to Cedar Lane before sunrise in school clothes, photograph them eating breakfast, and leave backpacks visible near the entry. Another message asked Melissa to send Ethan in a different sweatshirt because 2 photographs taken on different dates looked too similar. I thought of the wicker baskets, the untouched uniform shirts, and the frame tests in the breakfast nook. I had seen a stage because it was one. Those were not family photographs, I said. Melissa's voice dropped. No. Claire pulled up Judith's campaign biography. It praised her for assuming weekday responsibility for 2 grandchildren, while their parents faced ongoing instability. The wording had been published before Christmas, while Judith was still telling Melissa that the documents existed only for school access. Melissa read the paragraph twice. Color rose from her neck into her face. She made me sound incapable. She made herself sound necessary, Nathan said. The distinction settled over the room. Judith's favoritism had never meant Melissa was safe from her. It only meant Melissa's family was useful to the image Judith wanted to own. Claire explained the limited power of attorney, in plain language. It did not terminate Melissa's or Nathan's parental rights. It did not give Judith custody, and it would not automatically decide any future court dispute. It did, however, document delegated authority over school and routine medical decisions. Combined with a false weekday residence history, photographs, calendars, and public claims, it could become one item Judith might use to pressure Melissa if the marriage deteriorated. So Mom could not just take my children with this, Melissa said. No, Claire replied, but she could point to it and claim she had already been functioning as their regular caregiver. That claim would still be challenged, especially if the underlying facts were false. Priya asked Claire to display the original email thread from Melissa's inbox. Gordon had copied Melissa because her signature would be required for the February renewal. His message referred to maintaining consistency, but Judith's reply explained why. By February, we will have 6 months of school, doctors, breakfasts, and weekday care on paper. If Nathan files, no one can call us occasional grandparents. I read the sentence until the words stopped looking like words. Gordon had replied that the plan would work only if everyone kept the Cedar Lane routine consistent. He reminded Melissa that the children's answers, clothing, school materials, and overnight calendar had to match. Nathan removed his glasses and pressed his fingers against his eyes. Your parents were preparing for a custody fight that did not exist. Melissa stared at Judith's email. She kept telling me she was protecting me. She was preparing to become the person you could not function without, I said. For the first time since the district letter arrived, Melissa did not defend her. She authorized Claire to notify Brookfield County that the children did not live at Cedar Lane, that the weekday schedule was false, and that she would not appeal using the fabricated household story. Nathan confirmed his agreement on video. They would seek counseling and separate legal advice about their marriage and finances, but neither of them filed for divorce or began a custody case. Melissa asked whether I could wait until after New Year's to submit the owner correction. She wanted time to speak to Ethan and Piper before the school contacted them. I will not leave a forged signature in an official file for another week, I said. Your lawyer can ask the district to protect the children during the correction, but my part has to be accurate now. Priya sent the property owner confirmation while we were still seated at the table. It stated that I owned Cedar Lane, had not authorized Melissa's household as residents, had not appointed Judith as my property representative, and had not signed the owner authorization or false sublease. We provided no unrelated student records. The following morning, Leona confirmed receipt and opened a preliminary residency review. Her message requested only documents connected to ownership and the signatures attributed to me. She said the district would communicate separately with the parents and their counsel about the children's records and placement. Judith learned of Melissa's authorization before lunch. She called me 3 times, then sent a message accusing Melissa of betraying the only people who had protected her. I did not answer. The word betrayal meant something different to Judith. It meant someone had stopped cooperating with the version of reality she preferred. Late that afternoon, another message arrived from her. This one contained a preview image of Judith seated in Cedar Lane's living room beneath her campaign banner. A ring light reflected in the window, and Gordon stood blurred near the edge of the frame. Her caption read, "You wanted the truth public. Now everyone will hear why we used that address." Judith posted the video on December 29 at 8:14 in the morning. I was packing Maisie's lunch when Priya called and told me not to comment, share it, or send it to relatives. She instructed me to screen record the entire page, including the date, account name, caption, and public comments. Maisie was upstairs getting dressed. I put in my earbuds before opening the video, because I did not want my mother's voice reaching her room. Judith sat beneath the Cedar Lane fireplace mantel, wearing the red blazer from her campaign photographs. Her school board sign stood behind one shoulder. Gordon appeared at the edge of the frame for less than a second before stepping away. "My daughter has given 2 retired parents notice to leave their home," Judith began, "because we helped our grandchildren attend a safe school." She described herself as a grandmother punished for caring too much. According to her, Melissa could not afford a home inside Brookfield County, so she and Gordon had allowed Ethan and Piper to use Cedar Lane's address. She said the children spent time there before and after school, ate breakfast with their grandparents, and occasionally slept over when their parents worked late. Her public story described occasional help. The sworn forms described weekday residents, parents unable to provide consistent care, and Judith acting as the regular caregiver. My mother was trying to defend herself by replacing the official version she had built with a softer story for the public. Then she held up a photograph. "I will not allow Samantha to pretend we excluded her or her daughter," she said. "This was our family together on Christmas." Cousin Leah had taken the picture before dinner. Judith stood in the center with Ethan and Piper beside her. Maisie appeared several feet away near the hallway. Behind her was the folding table, already set apart from the main dining table. The photograph showed Maisie's place card beside one of its narrow chairs. Judith had posted the evidence herself. I screen recorded the video from beginning to end, then slowly scrolled through the comments. Several people praised her for helping her grandchildren. Others asked why legal documents had been necessary if the children only visited before school. Then Mark commented, "Samantha is furious because Judith pulled one chair and told the donor kid the big table was for real grandchildren. Now she is pretending it was about paperwork." My stomach tightened at the phrase donor kid. It reduced my daughter's life to the method that had helped me become her mother. Before I could close the page, Aunt Carol replied beneath him, "You left out that Maisie fell when the chair was pulled away. I was there. A child was hurt, and people laughed. Do not call that a misunderstanding." Another relative wrote that Judith had instructed Maisie to use the folding table before dinner. Leah did not describe the fall, but she confirmed that the photograph had been taken before anyone sat down and that the smaller table had already been prepared separately. The public thread was doing something I had refused to do. It was establishing witnesses without requiring me to post a photograph of Maisie's scraped hand, her swollen knee, or any private school documents. I wanted to answer Mark. I wanted to ask how a grown man could describe a 9-year-old that way and still believe he was defending family values. Instead, I saved the page and sent the recording to Priya. "You gain nothing by joining them," she said when she called back. Judith's own statements are relevant because they contradict the purpose and living arrangement claimed in the affidavits. Let the record speak where it belongs. Priya forwarded the preserved video and public comment thread to Leona as supplemental information for the preliminary residency review. She did not send campaign gossip or ask the district to punish Judith politically. She identified only the statements about why Cedar Lane's address had been used, how often the children stayed there, and what care Judith claimed to provide. Leona replied that the new information materially conflicted with documents already under review. Brookfield County would move from preliminary verification to a formal residency determination. Melissa and Nathan would receive separate communication through Claire. I would receive only requests concerning the property, the genuine tenancy, and documents bearing my alleged signature. By noon, Judith's video had spread beyond her campaign page. 2 volunteer co-chairs posted brief resignations. One wrote that she could not support a candidate who publicly justified inaccurate residency records while campaigning on school accountability. A local parent coalition paused its endorsement pending an explanation. It could not stop Judith from continuing to seek the school board seat. It could only stop lending her its name, while her own statements were being examined. Gordon texted me shortly after 2. I told her to remove it. She thinks the comments prove people support us. That message was the only reason I knew they disagreed privately. I did not imagine the argument or assign words to either of them. I only knew Gordon understood the danger, and Judith still believed attention was a form of control. The video disappeared several hours later. Deleting it changed nothing. Priya had preserved a complete copy, as had members of the public who had shared it. Judith could remove the original post, but she could not make hundreds of people forget what she had said. Maisie came downstairs while I was closing my laptop. She saw my face and stopped at the bottom step. Did Grandma say something about me again? She posted a video about the house and the school address. Did she show me falling? She asked. No, I said. I was grateful that part was true. Some adults discussed what happened, I continued. You do not need to read it, and you do not need to defend yourself. Maisie studied me. Are you defending me? Yes, but not by fighting strangers online. She nodded, though I could tell she did not fully understand. At 9, justice still looked like someone publicly saying the cruel person was wrong. I was learning that the safest victory often happened in rooms children never had to enter. The next day, Melissa called. She said Nathan had watched Judith's video and finally understood that the Cedar Lane arrangement had been presented publicly as evidence that he and Melissa could not provide a stable home. He wants every false statement corrected immediately, she said. Claire is going to represent us together for the district issue, but she told us to obtain separate advice if our marriage becomes part of anything else. Are you filing for divorce? No. We are angry, not divorced. I was relieved she understood the difference. My mother had prepared for a custody battle until the preparation itself began creating one. On New Year's Eve, Gordon emailed Priya, rather than contacting me directly. He offered to provide the editable leases, calendars, and form templates he had created. In return, he wanted written assurance that I would limit my cooperation to denying my signature and would not assist the district beyond correcting the property record. Priya read his proposal aloud during our call. He is offering evidence in exchange for control over what you say truthfully, she said. Can I agree just to get the files? No. The district's review belongs to the district. You cannot bargain away its authority, and you should not promise to withhold relevant facts. I thought of Judith's campaign message about stable homes. Every decision my parents had made came back to the same need. They wanted to decide which facts counted, which children belonged, and which version of the family everyone else was allowed to see. On January 2, Leona sent formal conference notices through the secure portal. The meeting would take place on January 12. Priya and I were included only for questions involving Cedar Lane's ownership, tenancy, and the signatures attributed to me. An attachment listed the documents the district expected me to authenticate. I recognized the false sublease and owner authorization from the first packet. The third document was new. It named Judith Carver as my authorized property agent, giving her permission to approve additional residents, execute occupancy documents, and verify household information on my behalf. My old signature appeared at the bottom. I had never seen the document, and I had never given my mother authority over Cedar Lane. The false property agent authorization had been built from a real piece of my past. On January 5, Priya placed it beside a maintenance approval I had signed 4 years earlier, when Cedar Lane needed emergency plumbing work. Gordon had received a scanned copy because he was home to let the contractor inside. The signature on the school document was the same image, resized and pasted beneath language, giving Judith authority I had never granted. Priya did not call it a forensic breakthrough. She asked me to sign a declaration, stating what I had and had not authorized, then attached the genuine maintenance approval to show the limited purpose of the original signature. My declaration was simple. I owned Cedar Lane. Judith and Gordon were tenants, not property agents. I had never authorized Melissa's family to live there, never permitted subletting, and never allowed either parent to sign occupancy documents on my behalf. Leona confirmed receipt and sent the evidence list to every party through the district's formal process. I did not receive Ethan's grades, attendance history, medical records, or anything else unrelated to my property. What I saw was limited to documents bearing my name, address, or alleged authority. Melissa and Nathan, through Claire, provided the original affidavit, the limited power of attorney, Gordon's overnight calendar, the email thread, and Judith's instructions about photographs and school materials. The residency conference took place on January 12 inches, a district meeting room with no cameras, campaign volunteers, or extended relatives. Leona sat at the head of the table beside district council. Melissa and Nathan were there with Claire. Judith and Gordon had retained their own attorney. Priya sat beside me because my role concerned Cedar Lane and the signatures attributed to me. Judith wore the same calm expression she used in campaign photographs. She looked irritated by the privacy of the room, as if a proceeding that could not be turned into an audience was somehow unfair. Leona began with the children's actual routine. Melissa and Nathan confirmed that Ethan and Piper slept at the Ashford house, and Claire supplied the utility and transportation records through the district's required channel. Gordon's overnight calendar contradicted that routine, while photographs labeled as separate school mornings had been staged during weekend visits. Leona did not question Ethan or Piper in front of us. She made clear that coached answers would not be treated as if children had designed the arrangement. When the property documents came up, Priya handed me the genuine tenancy agreement. Leona then moved through the false sublease, owner authorization, and property agent form. I denied every signature and every claimed grant of authority. Priya showed the maintenance approval from which my scanned signature had been taken. Gordon's attorney called some of the documents drafts. Submission dates and Gordon's own emails showed they had been used as final enrollment verification. Melissa admitted she had signed statements she knew were false because she wanted the children to remain in Brookfield. Nathan signed a correction acknowledging that he had accepted a questionable address arrangement, but had never agreed to be described as unable to care for his children. Gordon then admitted drafting the forms and creating the calendar. I wanted consistency, he said. Children give different answers when adults ask complicated questions. You taught them answers, Leona replied. I prepared them not to be confused. You prepared a false household and then trained children to describe it. Judith finally leaned forward. Grandparents bend rules for children every day. We fed them, drove them, helped with homework, and gave them access to better schools. No child was harmed by having more adults care. Leona's voice remained steady. Ordinary family help does not require notarized statements saying parents cannot provide consistent care. It does not require false leases, copied signatures, or staged evidence of overnight residence. Judith's attorney touched her arm, but she pulled away. Gordon followed my instructions because Samantha refused to help the grandchildren who had a real family to preserve. The room became very quiet. I had spent years trying to persuade my mother that Maisie was not an argument, an exception, or a social experiment. I had explained donor assistance, answered invasive questions, and accepted small exclusions because I thought patience might eventually become love. I no longer wanted an apology shaped by fear of consequences. You used my address to prove Melissa's children belonged in that house, I said. Why did you need a chair to prove mine did not? Judith looked directly at me. You made your choices, Samantha, she said. The rest of us should not have to pretend every choice creates the same kind of family. There it was, without euphemism. The chair had not been an impulsive punishment. The folding table, the photographs, and the word real had all come from the same belief. Judith considered my daughter less legitimate and considered herself entitled to use my property to protect the family she valued more. The answer hurt, but it ended the question. Leona returned the meeting to the district matter. She explained that Brookfield would issue a written residency determination. Ethan and Piper would not be publicly identified or punished. Brookfield and Ashford would coordinate a short transition, so their schooling did not stop abruptly. District Council said local policy allowed Brookfield to calculate non-resident tuition for the period of ineligible enrollment. Any assessment would be issued in writing with an opportunity to challenge the amount. No one announced a criminal fine, demanded money in the room, or threatened to remove the children that afternoon. On January 16, Leona sent the written determination. Ethan and Piper were not Brookfield residents. Melissa and Nathan received appeal instructions, but through Claire they declined to maintain the false claim. They arranged for the children to transfer on January 26. The district began calculating tuition separately. Melissa and Nathan would address it through council after receiving the written amount. Judith's campaign consequences moved on a different track. The parent coalition withdrew its endorsement after reviewing her public remarks, and more volunteers and donors left. No organization could stop her from continuing to seek the seat. They could only withdraw the names, labor, and credibility that had made her campaign look viable. Priya called that evening while Maisie was finishing homework at the kitchen table. "The school record is corrected," she said. "The tenancy is not." Judith and Gordon had not signed the surrender agreement, hired movers, or provided a move-out plan. Their tenancy still ended January 31. If they remained after that date, Priya could begin the first lawful possession filing on February 1. Before we ended the call, my phone displayed a new public post from Judith. She wrote that she would invite cameras to Cedar Lane so the community could watch her daughter throw two elderly parents into the winter cold. Priya called before I could respond to Judith's threat about inviting cameras to Cedar Lane. "Do not go there while she is staging a confrontation," she said. "You are ending a tenancy, not auditioning for her version of the story." She sent one final surrender proposal that afternoon. It offered Judith and Gordon a January 29 move-out date, 2 days before the tenancy legally ended. They would return all keys at the condition walkthrough, remove campaign materials from the property, stop using Cedar Lane as anyone else's address, and preserve every record connected to the district review. The agreement did not demand a public confession. It did not require them to waive unrelated rights or admit wrongdoing beyond the property terms. They could leave quietly, or they could remain past January 31 and face a lawful possession case. Judith replied through her attorney with one demand. She wanted to keep using the garage for campaign signs, tables, and printed materials through the November election. I refused. Ending the tenancy while allowing her campaign to remain in my garage would have left the door open in every way that mattered. Cedar Lane could not stop being her home while continuing to serve as the headquarters for the image she had built there. Through Priya, I learned that their attorney had explained the practical choice. Remaining after January 31 would not preserve Cedar Lane. It would create a public possession case in which the disputed property documents could become exhibits. Gordon repeated that warning in his written acceptance of the surrender terms. On January 20, Judith posted a written statement suspending her school board campaign. She blamed the decision on family interference and coordinated public pressure, but her two co-chairs had already resigned, volunteers had withdrawn, and the parent coalition no longer endorsed her. No official removed her. The people whose names and labor had made the campaign possible simply stopped lending them to her. That same day, Gordon sent Priya a written acceptance of the surrender terms. He stated that he had urged Judith to sign because he would not risk a holdover case after January 31. Attached to his email was a notice from the education consulting company that had hired him to train school administrators. After Judith's video circulated, the company asked Gordon whether his administrative work was involved in the residency review. Under the ethics clause in his contract, He disclosed the portion of the district determination addressing the forms he had prepared. The company would honor his current contract through the end of January, but would not renew his spring training work. He had spent years presenting himself as an expert in residency administration. The false household he designed had made that expertise the reason the company no longer trusted him. Judith and Gordon signed the surrender agreement on January 21. I felt no triumph when Priya sent me the completed copy. Relief arrived instead, followed by a sadness I could not name without sounding as though I regretted the boundary. I did not regret it. I regretted that my parents had been given several chances to tell the truth, and had chosen control each time. The next consequence belonged to Melissa and Nathan. Brookfield issued its written non-resident tuition calculation. Through Claire, they waived the residency appeal, negotiated a documented payment plan, and confirmed Ethan and Piper's transfer to Ashford schools on January 26. The children were not marched out of class or identified publicly. Their records moved through the normal process, and their parents handled the financial result privately. 2 days before the transfer, Melissa came to our townhouse alone. Maisie's knee was no longer swollen, though a yellowing bruise remained beneath the skin. She sat beside me on the sofa while Melissa took the armchair across from us. For once, my sister did not begin by defending her intentions. "I helped adults tell a lie," she said to Maisie. "The lie was about where Ethan and Piper lived, but it also helped Grandma treat them as more important than you. I knew part of it was wrong, and I stayed quiet because it helped my children." Maisie watched her carefully. "Did you know Grandma was going to pull the chair?" "No, I did not know she would do that." "But you knew she called them the real grandchildren." Melissa's eyes filled. "Yes, I heard her say things like that, and I did not stop her." Maisie looked at me before asking, "Am I supposed to forgive you?" Melissa shook her head. "No, I came to tell the truth and apologize. You do not owe me an answer." That was the first apology from anyone in my family that did not demand comfort in return. After Melissa left, Maisie asked whether Ethan and Piper were angry with her about changing schools. I told her their parents had created the situation and were responsible for explaining it. She was not required to carry their disappointment any more than they were responsible for Judith's choices. Cousin Mark sent his apology the next morning. He admitted laughing when Maisie fell and acknowledged that his public comment had been cruel. He said he had joined Judith's version because it was easier than admitting what he had watched. I replied that I appreciated the apology. I did not invite him over, add him back to our holiday plans, or promise that everything was repaired. An apology could be recognized without becoming a key to the same relationship someone had damaged. On January 29, movers arrived at Cedar Lane. I did not attend. Neither did Maisie. Priya's property manager, Daniel Ruiz, conducted the condition walkthrough after the final truck left. He documented minor wall damage, several abandoned campaign signs, and a broken cabinet hinge. Nothing required an argument in the driveway. Daniel collected every exterior, garage, and mailbox key. Gordon signed the surrender confirmation. The tenancy ended before the legal termination date, so no possession lawsuit became necessary. Among the items left behind was a cardboard box of family photographs. Judith had placed a note on top. "You are erasing the history that made you who you are." Daniel delivered the box to Priya's office, where I opened it without an audience. Inside were childhood photographs, pictures of Aunt Elaine, old-school portraits, and images from holidays before Maisie was born. I kept the photographs that belonged to my life. I placed the rest in a storage container, rather than destroying them or delivering them back in anger. Setting a boundary did not require me to perform cruelty in the opposite direction. Gordon had left a separate sealed letter. He wrote that he had copied my signature, invented property authority, constructed the weekday calendar, and coached Ethan and Piper to give answers that matched it. He did not call those actions administrative shortcuts. He called them dishonest. Near the end, he asked whether his cooperation could eventually earn him contact with Maisie. I answered through Priya. Accountability may begin a future conversation, but it does not purchase access to a child. Any contact will depend on Maisie's safety, her wishes, and sustained change that is not measured by a single letter. Judith sent her final message that evening. You destroyed this family because we have different values. I read it once and did not respond. Calling a child unreal was not a value I needed to debate. Forging authority was not a difference of opinion. The fact that Judith disagreed with the consequence did not make the consequence cruel. On January 31, Priya closed the eviction calendar. The tenants had surrendered possession, the keys had been returned, and there was nothing to file in court. I visited Cedar Lane that afternoon only because Daniel needed me to approve repairs. The house looked smaller without campaign signs, staged backpacks, or framed school papers. Pale rectangles marked the walls where Judith's photographs had hung. I did not change locks while music played or walk through the rooms imagining victory. I approved the cabinet repair, requested estimates for paint, and told Daniel I had not decided whether I would sell the house or rent it at market value. Maisie waited for me in the front room with her coat zipped to her chin. What will happen to Cedar Lane? She asked. I haven't decided yet. She considered that, then reached for my hand. Then the house can wait. I don't need to. 4 months later, on April 25, Maisie sat at our kitchen table with 3 spring performance tickets spread beside her art journal. Her knee had healed completely. The bruise disappeared long before winter ended, and she no longer hesitated before sitting down in unfamiliar places. The deeper injury had taken more patience. After Christmas break, she sometimes studied an adult's face before accepting an invitation, as though kindness might be withdrawn once enough people were watching. Mrs. Delgado, her teacher and the person supervising the performance, noticed before I did. She began giving Maisie small responsibilities during rehearsal, such as arranging music folders and helping younger students find their positions. She never announced that she was building Maisie's confidence. She simply gave her a place and behaved as if no one had the right to question it. The school had issued 3 guest tickets to each performer. Maisie opened her journal to a clean page and wrote a heading in purple marker. People I want there. She printed my name first. The second ticket went to Ruth Bell, Aunt Elaine's longtime neighbor. Ruth had stayed in contact with me since Elaine's funeral, sending birthday cards to Maisie, and calling every few weeks without asking for information she had not earned. After Christmas, she began visiting us for Sunday lunch. She never tried to replace anyone. She listened when Maisie talked and remembered what she said. The third ticket went to Denise Carter, the grandmother of Maisie's friend Jamal. Denise had welcomed Maisie during playdates, fed her too many cinnamon rolls, and treated every child at her table with the same easy warmth. When Maisie once asked where she should sit, Denise had looked surprised by the question and told her to choose whichever place let her reach the strawberries. Mrs. Delgado would already be at the performance with the students, so she did not need a ticket. Maisie wrote the 3 names carefully, then checked the spelling twice. I waited for her to ask whether Judith or Gordon had to be included, because they were related to her. I did not mention them. I had spent too many years introducing my mother into moments where Maisie had not asked for her. Is that everyone? I asked. Maisie counted the tickets. Yes. She did not look troubled by the number. She did not ask whether the audience would appear incomplete without more relatives. She placed each ticket inside an envelope and decorated Ruth's with yellow flowers and Denise's with small cinnamon rolls. Our family had not returned to normal because the version we once called normal had depended on Maisie accepting less. Melissa continued doing what accountability required without asking me to declare everything repaired. She and Nathan attended counseling, followed the Brookfield tuition payment plan, and worked through the financial problems they had hidden from each other. She gave me occasional updates through message openness that did not demand an immediate response. Ethan and Piper adjusted to their Ashford schools more quickly than the adults had feared. Their contact with Maisie remained limited and ordinary. They exchanged birthday messages, spoke during one supervised family visit with Melissa, and played an online word game twice. No one forced the three children into instant closeness to prove the adults had learned something. Melissa once asked whether I thought we could all spend Thanksgiving together. Not this year, I told her. She accepted the answer without arguing. That mattered more than any promise she could have made. Gordon sent a second letter in March. Unlike his first, it did not ask whether cooperation had earned him access to Maisie. He wrote that copying my signature and coaching Ethan and Piper had been his choices, not actions Judith had forced on him. More importantly, he admitted what his first letter had avoided. He had watched Judith pull the chair away and worried first about protecting the genuine lease instead of the child on the floor. I stored the letter with Priya. I did not make Maisie read it. An adult's confession belonged to the adult until the child was old enough and willing to decide whether it served her. Judith sent a card 2 weeks before the performance. The front showed a watercolor family gathered beneath a flowering tree. Inside, she wrote that too much had happened on all sides and that blood should matter more than old grievances. There was no mention of Maisie's fall, the false documents, or the words real grandkids. Judith still wanted reconciliation to mean that everyone accepted her explanation. I placed the card in the same file as the other records and did not show it to Maisie. Protecting my daughter did not require presenting every wound to her merely because it arrived in an envelope. On the evening of the performance, Maisie wore a pale blue dress and silver shoes she had chosen herself. She stood backstage with 20 other children while families filled the auditorium. I sat between Ruth and Denise. Ruth carried a small bouquet wrapped in brown paper. Denise had brought enough mints for an entire row and whispered that school chairs had been designed by people who disliked grandparents. When the curtain opened, Maisie walked to her place beneath the stage lights. For one brief moment, she scanned the audience. I saw the old caution in the way her eyes moved across the rows. Then she found me. She found Ruth holding the flowers, and Denise waving before Mrs. Delgado gently signaled for everyone to settle. Maisie's shoulders relaxed. She did not search again. The performance was a collection of songs, short readings, and student artwork projected behind the children. Maisie read 4 lines about spring gardens. Her voice trembled on the first sentence and steadied by the second. When she finished, the audience applauded, and she smiled without looking toward the places where absent relatives might have sat. Afterward, she ran toward us in the hallway. "Can we get pizza?" she asked. "All the people I invited?" Denise said she had never rejected an invitation involving melted cheese. Ruth handed Maisie the bouquet, and Mrs. Delgado joined us long enough to tell her how clearly she had spoken. There was no replacement Christmas dinner. We did not recreate a holiday table or turn an ordinary meal into a ceremony about surviving my mother. We went to a crowded neighborhood restaurant, ordered 2 large pizzas, and argued cheerfully about whether pineapple belonged on one of them. Maisie talked about the performance, Jamal's missed entrance, and the boy who had sneezed during the quietest reading. No one asked her to discuss Cedar Lane. No one praised her for being strong or expected her to transform pain into a lesson for the adults. She was allowed to enjoy the evening. When we returned home, she opened her art journal and taped the invitation list beneath a sketch of the stage. She smoothed the page with both hands. I stood in the doorway, remembering how I once believed every family gathering needed every relative present before it could count as whole. I had confused completeness with attendance and biology with entitlement. In trying to keep my parents in Maisie's life, I had allowed them to behave as though their presence was a gift she had to earn. Maisie closed the journal without checking whether another name should be added. Judith had wanted the authority to decide which grandchildren were real. She lost that authority the moment I stopped asking her to use it kindly. My daughter did not need to force anyone to claim her. She had learned to recognize the people who made joy feel safe, and she was finally free to choose them for herself.